Okay, so imagine this, right? You're strolling through a park in Spain, sun's shining, everything's lovely, but instead of hearing kids playing, all you hear are dogs barking.
Mm.
More pups than toddlers. Can you believe that?
Wow. Yeah.
That's what's happening in Spain. The birth rate's plummeting, and it's making headlines. Today, we're going to dive deep into this using two sources, an article from La Vanguardia, a major Spanish newspaper, and a super interesting Reddit thread on our futurology, all about it. We're going to try to figure out why this is happening, what it could mean for Spain, and how people are reacting to this whole shift.
Sounds like a fascinating topic with maybe some surprising differences in how the traditional media and the online world see things.
Definitely. Okay, so La Vanguardia doesn't hold back. They dropped this stat right away. Spain's latest census shows a whopping 80,000 fewer kids under 16 compared to last year.
And the article makes it clear this isn't just a blip. It's been going down for 3 years straight. Since 2021, the number of kids has dropped by 3.2%, while the population 64 and over has grown by 6.6%. It's like, two ends of a seesaw going in opposite directions fast.
So basically, those over 64 now make up 20% of Spain, more than the 14% under 16. Kind of mind-blowing, right? It's like watching a whole generation shift right before our eyes.
Yeah, exactly. And this aging population is a big deal. What happens to their health care? Who pays for pensions if fewer people are working? Can Spain's economy handle this change? Big questions.
And the article even talks about, like, a cultural shift. Parks used to be full of kids, now it's all dog walkers. Is Spain changing, like, fundamentally?
Makes you wonder, right? What do people value now? How are lifestyles changing? But hold on, the article also points out something else. While the native-born population is shrinking, the total population actually grew last year by over 500,000.
That's right, because of immigration. The article says 18.2% of Spain's population is foreign-born, and that group grew by almost 8% just last year.
So, immigration's playing a big role. It might be offsetting some of the decline, but of course it brings its own set of challenges, integrating people, making sure there's enough housing and jobs, keeping society cohesive. How Spain handles all that, it's crucial.
And get this, the article breaks down the immigration numbers further. The biggest increases are from Colombia, Peru, and Venezuela. Overall, the largest foreign-born groups are Moroccans, Romanians, and Colombians. But now, let's see what everyday folks are saying about all this. The Reddit thread on her futurology is buzzing, and one thing keeps coming up: the financial strain of having kids in Spain these days.
Yeah, it's a harsh reality for a lot of young people. The Redditors are really feeling the pinch financially. That's a major reason why many are hesitant to have kids.
It's not just the cost of diapers and stuff like that, it's the whole cost of living, especially rent. Imagine trying to raise a family when a single room in Madrid costs 800 to 900 euros a month. And then you factor in the minimum wage, which is like 7 or 8 euros an hour. It's rough.
It's a tough spot to be in, for sure, especially when wages are stagnant and everything else, like food and energy, is getting more expensive. And, this isn't just a Spain thing, right? A lot of developed countries are dealing with the same anxiety. It's a global trend.
Totally. There's this one story on Reddit that really got to me. It's about someone with a PhD in chemistry, and they couldn't find a job that paid more than 8 euros an hour. Think about it. Years of studying, and then you can barely make ends meet. It makes you think twice about adding kids to the equation.
Yeah, no kidding. It's like there's a disconnect between getting educated and actually earning a decent living. If even highly qualified people are struggling, what does that say about the bigger economic picture for young folks?
Exactly. A lot of comments are like, how can we even think about kids when we can barely pay our own bills?
Right.
Or having kids feels like a luxury we just can't afford. But it's not all about the money either. The Reddit discussion also points out how younger generations are shifting their values, like what's important to them. It's not just about settling down and having kids anymore.
Right. It's like personal fulfillment and building a career are taking center stage. Traveling, learning new things, having the freedom to do what you want. Those things are often seen as more important than starting a family.
And being child-free is becoming more accepted, too. It's not seen as weird or selfish anymore. For many people, it's an empowered choice.
Yeah, it's not just about finances anymore, right? The Reddit discussion really shows how complicated the decision to have kids has become. There's so much to consider.
Absolutely. And we can't forget the impact of women's empowerment either. More women are getting educated and having careers. Motherhood isn't the only option anymore, it's a choice. This is a huge change from previous generations, and it's definitely changing family structures and priorities.
It's fascinating to see how this idea of individual choice plays out in the Reddit discussion. Ultimately, the decision to have children is super personal, and it's influenced by all sorts of economic and personal factors.
So we've got this shrinking population, driven by money worries and changing values. What are people suggesting we do about it? Well, the Redditors have some interesting ideas.
I'm always curious about what solutions people come up with online. What are the Redditors proposing?
The most common one is government intervention. They want policies that make having kids more appealing, either through financial help or things that improve work-life balance.
Hmm, interesting. It seems like people often turn to the government when they see big societal trends that worry them. I wonder what specific policies they have in mind.
Some ideas that pop up are things like shorter work weeks, government-paid parental leave, and cheaper childcare.
Yeah, those are all areas where policy changes could make a real difference. Imagine a Spain where you actually have more time to spend with your family, or even just relax. Maybe that would change how people feel about becoming parents.
And of course, there's also the issue of the high cost of living, especially housing. Making housing more affordable is a huge challenge, not just in Spain, but everywhere. But think about the impact it would have if young people didn't have to worry so much about rent or mortgages.
Yeah, that's a tough one. There are so many factors involved, like zoning laws, supply and demand, and even people speculating on housing prices. But there's no doubt that making housing more accessible would be a game changer. It would take a huge financial burden off young people's shoulders.
It's interesting how the Reddit discussion jumps back and forth between individual choices and systemic problems. Is it about personal responsibility, or are there bigger forces at play?
Yeah, that's the core of these complex societal issues, isn't it? Individual choices are always shaped by the systems and structures we live in. Finding solutions means addressing both individual needs and the systemic barriers that hold people back.
And what's even more interesting is that there's no agreement on whether fewer births are actually a bad thing. There are strong arguments on both sides, which shows how our values and priorities shape how we see the world.
Right. Is it all about economic growth no matter what? Or is it about creating a more sustainable and balanced future, even if it means rethinking what progress really means? These are questions everyone's grappling with, not just in Spain.
For sure. The Reddit discussion shows two different visions of the future. One's focused on keeping the economy growing the way it always has, and the other's about sustainability and finding a better balance. It's a tension that's playing out all over the world.
It really makes you think about what kind of society we want to live in and what our values are. What's the ideal population size? How do we balance individual needs with the needs of the planet?
These are huge questions that we're going to keep unpacking. This whole issue is far from simple, and we've only scratched the surface. But what we've seen so far is that Spain's shrinking population is a result of many factors, and the way people see it is complex too.
Exactly. And it's important to keep the conversation going, to listen to different viewpoints and challenge our own assumptions. That's what makes these deep dives so valuable.
Absolutely. And that's just the beginning. In part two, we're going to dig even deeper into what this all means for Spain's future and explore whether it's truly a crisis or maybe a chance to create something better.
It's a debate that's only going to get more intense as this trend keeps going. What's really interesting is how the Redditors are challenging the whole idea that fewer births are a bad thing.
Right. It's not all doom and gloom. Some are saying, hey, instead of trying to make people have more kids, maybe we should figure out how to live in a world with fewer people. Could that actually lead to some cool solutions?
It's definitely a different way of looking at it. Instead of fighting it, maybe we adapt. Like, what if we invest more in automation and tech to deal with labor shortages, or rethink how our social safety net works with a smaller workforce? Those are things we can do anyway, whether we see a smaller population as good or bad.
I like that. It's about being proactive and creative, not just sticking to the old ways of doing things. And the Redditors actually point out some potential upsides to a less crowded world. Less competition for resources, less strain on infrastructure, maybe even a slower, more relaxed pace of life.
Yeah, it makes you question our assumptions, right? Do we always need more to be happy? Or could we find a different kind of fulfillment in a world that's more balanced and sustainable?
It's a good question to ask ourselves. Of course, the Reddit discussion doesn't have all the answers, but it does show how people are thinking and feeling about all this. It reminds us that this issue is complicated and there's no easy fix.
Exactly. It's important to hear those different voices and get outside our own bubbles. That's what's so great about platforms like Reddit.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second and think about what we've learned from both sources. What are the big takeaways from La Vanguardia in the Reddit discussion?
Well, the first thing is that Spain's declining birth rate isn't a simple problem with a simple solution. It's caused by a bunch of factors, like economic stress, wages not keeping up, changing values, and individual choices. It's not as easy as just telling people to have more babies.
Right. We can't ignore the bigger picture, the way society is structured. This is a deep-rooted issue, and the solutions have to be smart and multi-layered.
Definitely. And the solutions people are talking about show that complexity. Some want the government to step in with incentives or financial support. Others say we need to embrace a future with fewer people and adapt our systems to that reality.
So it's not about finding one magic solution. It's about exploring different approaches and figuring out what works best in each situation.
And what's really interesting is that there isn't even a consensus on whether this is a good or bad thing. There are valid points on both sides, which just shows how much our values and priorities shape how we see things.
It comes back to those big questions, right? Do we prioritize economic growth above everything else? Or do we try to create a more sustainable and balanced world, even if it means rethinking what progress looks like? And those questions aren't just for Spain, they're for everyone.
Totally. The Reddit discussion is a good reminder that there isn't one right answer. This is a complex issue with long-term consequences, and we need to keep talking about it and be open to different viewpoints.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. Remember that image from the La Vanguardia article? The one with more dogs than kids in Spanish parks? It really stuck with me.
Yeah, I get that. It's a powerful image that sums up this demographic shift we're talking about. So what's the question that image sparked for you?
Well, it made me wonder, if you could design a society that encourages families but also ensures individual happiness and environmental sustainability, what would it look like?
That's a great question. A society that finds that balance between what individuals want, what society needs, and what's good for the planet in the long run. Imagine a Spain or any country where having children is seen as a joyful choice, not a financial burden.
Yeah, imagine a world where work-life balance isn't just a luxury, but a basic right, where everyone can afford a decent place to live, where communities are strong and supportive.
It would require us to rethink our priorities and challenge how things are done now. It's about imagining a world where personal fulfillment and societal well-being go hand in hand with taking care of the planet.
We may not have all the answers right now, but this deep dive has shown us how important it is to keep talking about this, and that there are many paths we can explore. We don't have to just accept declining birth rates as some inevitable decline. Maybe it's a chance to create something new and better.
It's a reminder that even with tough challenges, there's always room for hope and creative thinking. And who knows, maybe by facing these challenges head on and having these tough conversations, we can build a future that's even better than we can imagine right now.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive into Spain's birth rate, I'm feeling, I don't know, kind of hopeful. It's easy to focus on the negative stuff, but looking at these sources, it feels like there's a real chance to do things differently.
Yeah, I agree. It's not about clinging to the old ways or just like panicking. It's about being open to change and actually creating a society that puts people and the planet first.
Exactly. Finding that balance between what individuals want, what society needs, and what's good for the environment. And it's got to be a conversation that includes everyone, young and old.
Absolutely. What if we could bridge that gap between those who see this as a disaster and those who see it as a chance to change things for the better? Imagine combining the experience of older generations with the fresh ideas of younger folks.
I like that. Using tech to help an aging population, while also giving young people the tools to build a more fair and sustainable world.
We're at a turning point, right? The choices we make now will determine what happens next. Do we stick with what's familiar, even if it's not working? Or do we dare to imagine something different, something better, a future that's both prosperous and, in harmony with nature?
It takes guts to challenge the status quo, but it's worth it, right? We've seen how much potential there is.
And even small things can make a difference. Speaking up for family-friendly policies, making eco-conscious choices, even just having these conversations, every step counts.
That's what we want to encourage. Keep the conversation going. Share your thoughts, your hopes, your ideas, because the future we create starts with the choices we make today. Let's face these challenges head on and build a world that's good for everyone, for generations to come.
Couldn't have said it better myself.